Hello and welcome to episode 46 of the Large Format Photography Podcast. My name is Simon Forster and I'm joined by Andrew Bartram, Eric Matthey and Jarob Ortiz. Hello Andrew.
Hello Simon.
Hello Eric.
Simon.
Hello and hello Jarob.
Hello, how are you doing?
Very well, and it's great to have you with us this week. Right, first of all, as usual, I want to say thank you to our last guest from 2 weeks ago, and that was Mac.
No, it wasn't.
Again. It was Matt. We were talking about this before we actually started the show. I always mess our names up, and it's going to be okay this week. I was thinking, I've got over Jarob's surname. I've spelt it phonetically, and everything's going to be fine. And I'm thinking, I'm going to have to say Matt's name again. And so I'm going to say thank you to Matt Bettberger. It was great to have you with us, helping us out with our emails, and also we learned a lot about Matt himself, and we also learned about his Kickstarter for his spot meter. And I'd like to say that we could take some credit for his successful Kickstarter,
of course,
which as we speak is 800% oversubscribed.
Dude, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think it was actually, have I got the actual screen somewhere? Because it tells you it was, it was fully funded in 1 hour and 40 minutes. And so that was on the Monday. Our podcast came out, I think, it's gone up while I'm even speaking. And our podcast came out on the Friday after. So obviously nobody else actually put anything into it at all until they listened to our podcast. And now the original goal was, and this is in Canadian dollars, I think, 15,900 Canadian dollars, and it's currently sitting at 133,000 Canadian dollars.
Ridiculous. And I thought that was a fairly low goal, relatively speaking.
Well, it was.
Yeah, apparently. Jarob, do you know what he's doing? Any context? Okay, so he made a little. His first Kickstarter was a little hot shoe mounted light meter, right? Just a very simple hot shoe mounted light meter, and,
like the old Leica ones.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But a modern take on that. And so he decided, because he's a pretty good industrial designer and electrical engineer, to go ahead and take a crack at spot meters, because nobody's sort of rethought the spot meter in a long time.
Yeah.
And spot meters are big and bulky. People usually end up buying either a lot of money on the brand new ones or getting like the old classic Pentax spot meter, for even more than they sold for brand new back in the day. And they're big and bulky, and police in the United States might shoot you if they see you with one because it looks like a pistol.
Yeah.
And you're like, no. And so he's got this tiny little light meter. It's like this big, like 4 inches. And you put it up to your eye, and you keep your other eye open, and it essentially superimposes on your vision the tiny spot you're looking at. And it has a comparative value. It's really, really slick.
I want that.
I figured you might. That's why I brought it up.
I really want that.
It's right in line with what you use. Has like 3 or 4 different modes. Where you and I are from, by the way, audience, Jarob and I are both from Wisconsin. They would say it's slicker than goose shit.
He's just
because
introduced.
It is.
Did you see his update,
slicker
Eric?
than goose shit.
Eric, did you see his update on the Kickstarter?
No.
He's introduced, after some feedback, he's introduced a 4th mode to the spot meter, which is a pure zone system one. So he had this kind of bastardized zone system thing based on identifying a texture and saying this is like mid-gray, or this is flaky white or something, But now you can point this thing at a tone and place it as your zone 3, and then it does all the positions, from that, and you can go and check in the same way as you can in the other modes the contrast range between them, but it anchors your zone 2 and 3 and 4, whatever you want, So it's super
Great.
cool.
It's hecka slick, and it's pretty damn affordable.
Yeah,
for a brand
That's
new
great.
meter. It's what is it at? How much is it? I can't remember.
I think it's about 125 of your sterling pounds.
Wow.
Yeah, but who uses sterling pounds?
We do.
Half this podcast does.
Oh, fair. Okay.
And half this
Worth more than the U.S. dollar. I'll tell you that right now. I'll take some of those sterling pounds right now.
Dude, 100%. It's hold on, 225 Canadian dollars for 1 meter.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, a Sekonic, the only Sekonic that's out there with a spot meter is like, what, $700?
Yep.
Exactly.
Really expensive. Really pricey.
We talked about it at length last time out, but for me, it's you can argue if you're really addicted to your spot meter, then that's fair enough. Stick with what it is. But for me, as somebody that uses a spot meter occasionally, it's tiny. And you can fit it in your pocket,
so
and as we all know, carrying our gear around can be a real problem. So sometimes I'm there thinking, shall I take my spot meter with me as well as my quite large light meter? And half the time I leave it, and I wish I brought it with me. And now I can bring it guilt-free.
And you can look super cool. You know that classic photograph of Gordon Parks when he's directing the learning tree, and he's got his cinematographer's loop so he can check the scene out. He's just got this cool ass loop up. You can look like Gordon Parks. Of course, he will be far more stylish than any of us because Gordon Parks just oozed cool. But it's just that small. It's really badass. Which actually brings me to opening question. Although we should probably introduce her before I ask the opening question.
Go with it, Eric. However you wish to take it.
No, well, I don't. Who is this guy?
Well, yeah, we do have a guest. He has said hello as well. So take it from there, Eric.
Oh, I'm doing the intro?
Yeah,
I thought you were doing the intro.
Yeah, go for it.
Lord love a duck. All right. Sorry, that's another Wisconsinism. I'm in full-blown cheesehead. Worse than usual, this podcast. So, ladies and gentlemen, our guest this podcast this week is Jarob Ortiz. And I didn't slaughter his name. I fully expected to. Jarob is the man that most of us in the large format world would call the luckiest man on earth because he landed the gig that, what was that, Jarob, like 4 years ago? 5 years ago?
I think it was posted in 2015.
Right.
The job was posted.
Right. So 6 years ago, Petapixel, everybody started putting up this job ad for the National Park Service is looking for a large format photographer, our next Ansel Adams. And everyone was just like, ah! And I had just started getting into large format photography at the time. And I was like, there's no way I could land this gig. And I'd always wondered who landed that gig? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's our guest today, Jarob Ortiz. And so I was going to start with spot meters, but I guess now it's like, where do we even start? Like,
hats. Do you have a big hat?
Yeah. Go Ansel. Do you got the big Ansel hat?
I do have a large Tilly hat that I do wear.
Tilly hat as well. Excellent. Yeah.
But I have to because as I've worked with the Park Service and all the exposure to the elements, I've developed a rosacea as a result of being in these extreme colds and extreme hots, getting wind blown and everything out there. So now I have to protect myself from the sun any way I can when I'm out there because my skin does not like it. So I have to wear the big brimmed hat. I'll take it. I don't mind it. It's a good look.
It's a good look. Like, yeah.
A word of advice, though. Don't pair it up with a photographer's waistcoat, will you?
No. Absolutely not.
And so
Go on then, Eric. Ask some sensible questions.
Dude, that you got the wrong guy. So I guess we could probably start with like, what was? I was thinking that interview process would be almost like a dogfight. Like how would that interview process go? I figured it'd be like a big gladiatorial contest. Like everybody goes into the ring and starts showing images and like duking it out, and like the strongest shall survive. But what was it really like interviewing for all things, like a large format photographer for the National Park Service? Like, what was that process like? Because everybody who saw that job ad was like, one, I could do that. No, I couldn't. But then, like, how would you even go about getting that gig?
So it's really funny, right? Because it's a government job. So, and I had experience dealing with government stuff because I was in the military. I'd applied for other photography jobs in the VA hospital. So it all went through USA jobs. That's where it all went through. But if I could just say, going back, I mean, I kind of had the same feeling as you are talking about with this whole job. When I saw the posting that you're talking about, Petapixel, and it was even on Good Morning America, they had it on there, and it's like, okay. And I saw it, and I was like, a lot of people told me to apply for the job, but I was under the same misconception that everybody else was, landscape photographer going out and doing these photos of these magnificent places at the Park Service. And I'm like, I'm never going to get that job. There's so many people that have done that for so much longer than me, that have a portfolio, a much better portfolio, just a wider portfolio. All I had done for landscapes at that point was the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and Wisconsin. I was just really staying in my area. So I didn't really think I was going to get the job, and I didn't think I had any chance, so I wasn't even going to apply for it. But then I remembered, oh, well, this is a government job. It's on USA Jobs. Let me go read the job description. So I go on there, and I start reading it, and they start talking about, first thing that pops up is heritage documentation programs, historic American building survey, historic American engineering record, historic American landscape survey. And as I started reading the description, I realized, oh, this is not a landscape position. This is an architectural photographer's position, an industrial photographer's position. And at that point, I was doing this kind of photography commercially in the Midwest. And I was also doing my own project to no one, I should say. There was no one financing this project. I just wanted to do it. Photographing Gary, Indiana, and all the old architecture that was there.
Right.
And I was doing it all on large format just because I thought it was important and I wanted to do it. I was working on it with my brother because he's a photographer too. Cool. And so as soon as I saw that, I was like, I can do this. This can happen. I can apply for this job. Never expected to get it. Let me just throw that out there. Never expected to get this job. And in fact, I was going to get out of photography in terms of doing it as a job. I was going to go work at the post office because it's just such a dog-eat-dog world in commercial photography, and that's not really my personality. I don't really operate like that. I love photography. I love the process of photography, but that's not my thing. So this was my last gasp. So I put it together, looked at it, read the whole job description, looked exactly what they were looking for in there, and then spent nine days, about 8 to 12 hours a day working on my resume, 9 straight days in a row, making sure that I was hitting all the points that they were talking about in that job description, reflecting my job experience and all the things that I've done with photography in that resume, but keeping it short and concise so that it wasn't 10 pages long. It's just nice 2-page long thing. And I submitted that. And after I submitted it, I said, okay, that's cool. I was pretty much done with everything else. I cut myself off from all the commercial clients. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to blow all my money and travel around Wisconsin and forget about this. And I'm just going to spend these, however long it is, just traveling, fly fishing, photographing Wisconsin for however long until the money runs out. And I think it was about 6 months later, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I got an email, and I thought it was the denial letter, but it was something else that I'd never seen before from a government job application. My mom knew about it because she worked at the VA hospital. So I took it to her and I'm like, Mom, what is this? And she just looks at me and goes, oh my gosh, you made it through the first round. You're in the list of people that are going to do it. So they sent me an email that just said, pick a time slot for an interview. Pick a time slot. Because they weren't going to fly people from every corner of the country to Washington, D.C. They were just going to do phone interviews. So I picked a time slot that they had. And I think they took the number of people from 4,500 applicants and narrowed it down to 19 people based just on the resumes that they received. It was either 19 or 16 people. And so I just picked a slot and then kind of had to go back and relearn the technical terms and not the jargon, right? Like talking in scientific terms, the way that you approach photography and not the way we just throw terms back and forth as fellow photographers. Kind of brush up on that stuff, start brushing up on all the different types of architecture that I know and like the different eras of architecture and industry. I mean, realistically, architecture isn't my specialty in terms of being a historian of architecture. I know a lot more about industry than I do about architecture, but you know, just going back through and touching up on everything and making sure that I had it all in line. And then then we had the interview and it went really well and everything. And I felt pretty good after the first interview. They badgered me pretty well. I felt it went well because they actually gave me about 10 extra minutes than what was scheduled. And when that happened, I was like, I think I did good enough to get another interview. We got 10 extra minutes there. They don't normally do that.
Yeah, Jarob, were they asking you a mixture of sort of why you want to do this and technical, mastery of? Was it all about view cameras at that point, or was that part of the job description? And were they quizzing you on all of that and technique as well as vision and architecture all sort of rolled into one?
So it was all about view cameras. It was 100% about view cameras. Even in the job description, they wanted to know your understanding of the whole thing. And they were really hammering in the idea of zone system photography. So they wanted to know how you set up zone systems, how you apply zone systems. Then they didn't really ask me about camera operations or anything like that. I think they just kind of picked it up from who the applicant was and kind of got a sense based on around the way you talked about it. So they didn't really ask me anything like that. Like they weren't asking like, what's the Scheinflug principle? They weren't asking me anything like that. They're like, how do you figure out what's the calculation for figuring out bellows extension and exposure compensation for macro photography? Like none of that stuff. It wasn't crazy like that, but they were more interested in the approach to how you finish a job. So so tell us about the process what your process would be when you approach a site with your camera and how you would quickly get through a whole project, how you would document a building and stuff like that. And they were really interested in my other areas that I knew too about like printing, because I had done a lot of stuff with color management and printing for companies. That's kind of how I supplemented income working in such a tough market in Milwaukee. They were really interested in that. I'm trying to think of what else that is. Man, it feels like it's so long ago, but it's really not.
Jarob, maybe you should. You mentioned they asked you about quizzing you about how you approach the subject, and and handled the project and how you kind of sized it up and that. So I mean, that has that changed your ideas of how you did it then to now? Is that changed? And if so, how has your approach to your industrial photography changed, if it has?
It's definitely changed. I've had to be a lot more. Before this, I was uncompromising. Like, it always had to be perfect. It always had to be 100%. Like, and if it wasn't the way that I saw it in my mind's eye before this job, I would just simply walk away and say, we'll do this another time.
You're talking mainly lighting. Sorry, Jarob. Are you talking mainly lighting?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If the lighting and conditions were not exactly how I wanted them before the Park Service, I would walk away from it. Mm-hmm. But here, with this job, you don't have that kind of flexibility. You go to a site, you got 1 week, and you better get it done because the chances of going back it's not going to happen. So what it's really done is made me figure out how to solve the puzzle, more or less. Like, okay, this is what I got in front of me. How do we make this better? What kind of things can I do on my end to get a photo that represents my original vision of this place? How can I get as close to that, as close to what I saw in my mind's eye? How can I do that?
Do you also have like when you're shooting an interior or an exterior or whatever, commercially we'll often have, an art director or somebody there. It's like, this is what we need, this is what we're after. And they'll look at the back of the camera, they'll check the shot, that sort of stuff. Does a Park Service, like when you're shooting an interior, is there like an art director or a conservationist or something like that going, okay, these are the important parts of this, and this is what we have to get?
So I kind of iron that out beforehand. I will talk to somebody that's in charge of a project, whether it's the historic preservation officer or just somebody at the park, or one of our historians or architects in my office. I'll talk to them and say, what are the absolute, we need to have these photographs. What are those particular frames? Because I don't want to miss those. And they kind of give me that outline, and then they let me fill in the gaps with the way that I see it. But usually when I'm on site, I'm by myself. There's no one else there with me. Unless I travel with a team of architects, and then they're there too, but we just kind of get in each other's way all day. And that makes things really difficult because they're 3D laser scanning the whole building at the same time I'm trying to do large format photography of a building. So it becomes kind of a give and take. It's gotten better the last couple of years. We've figured out how to do that, and we really have come up with a process where we kind of work around one another and coordinate a lot better. But at the start, it was really wild. There was some learning. There were some pains there.
Dude, that would be such a cool shot. Sorry, I'm just totally nerding out at the 3D lasering in the interior of a building. And just like a long exposure, multiple exposure of the same room with like the lasers lighting up different areas in color would be dope. But I'm sure that's not actually possible, and it sucks. But nice thought.
Doesn't really work like that.
Yeah, for me, it's like a science fiction movie. Like, yeah.
No, it doesn't really work like that.
What sort of buildings are we talking about, and who determines or what criterions used for what goes on the list of of things you've got to get done in any year, whatever?
So realistically, we can do any building. There is no real criteria. We do buildings that are even privately owned. Normally, we're looking for stuff that's on the National Historic, Register or National Historic Landmarks, things of that nature. But it can be any bit of architecture or industry that's deemed culturally relevant. But realistically, the way that all works is who can appropriate the funds to get it done, right? Everything costs something. Everything's got some kind of, expenditure attached to it. We don't really determine that in our office. That's up for the parks, the regions, the individual areas of the national park, to determine what areas need to be documented. And then they'll come to us and they'll ask us how much it'll cost to do it, and then they determine whether or not that fits their year's budget or not. It's kind of the way it works.
You could.
I wish it was more like, okay, boy, yeah, I really would like to go do this place. We just go do it, but it's not really.
You could put pretty much anything on that list. You use the term "what's culturally relevant." Those guys, all the names just escape me at the moment, but the guys who formed that movement, the new topographics, when they went out and just took pictures of those new buildings that were springing up in the desert for houses, and they were all the same, and now they, at the time, people would say, well, why are you photographing those? But actually 30, 40 years on, it takes on a whole new meaning, doesn't it? So, but you can't do everything because you haven't got the cash, I presume.
Yeah. And also there's really only one of me, right? And I have to service the whole entire country. So that's also a limitation. We do have contractors that work with us, but it's becoming a little bit more difficult because the number of people doing this kind of technical photography where you're looking for maximum detail in every single frame, right? Like, you don't want something that's extra contrasty where you got really dark blacks and blown out highlights or anything like that. You're not looking for something that you have to interpret. You want a negative that's, very even, perfectly exposed. So the people that can do this kind of work or understand how to get to that point on a consistent, regular basis, that list of people is shrinking every single, it seems, month, right? Because that's an older demographic, right, people, and a lot of younger people aren't really, they might pick up the view camera and it's great, and they go out and shoot landscapes and all this stuff, but really getting into the weeds of establishing zone systems and figuring out how to get negatives that are, representative from zone 3 through zone 8, because you can determine to go outside those zones when necessary, but you don't want zone 2 to 0 over a whole part of your negative, or anything zone 9 and 10 taking up large areas of your negative either, right?
Right.
Jarob, for people who we're losing on the podcast, what you're essentially saying is you want a negative where you've got some usable shadow detail and some usable highlight detail.
Absolutely.
And you're not looking for things outside that. And that would be typically, to talk photographic terms, 5 or 6 stops, really. That's sort of thing I aim for, really,
Right.
Yeah, and it's difficult when you're doing interiors, right? Because you're talking about shooting, like, for example, the one area that I did last year was up at Oregon Caves National Monument. They got this chateau up there. It's an amazing place. It's up on the top of this mountain, all secluded in the middle of the forest. It's a beautiful place. But photographing it is not easy. The whole interior is dark wood. And then you got these windows on every single wall. And you got to photograph it, and you have to maintain the detail of that dark wood and the details surrounding all those windows, because that's relevant information, right? You want to see what the trim is on those windows. You want to see the environment outside the windows even too. So you have to come up with these like crazy lighting schemes and really be particular in the way you meter the whole thing, so that you're maintaining both that outside the window and all the texture and material detail of those walls.
I was
those
curious
dark
about
wood
that.
walls.
That actually brings it back to the spot meter question, because the zone system, technically, from what little I remember it, right from 20 some odd years ago, in school, we spent a little bit of time in the zone system. Wasn't just a matter of like, okay, you place your zone 5 here, you place your zones here, but it was also, establishing with every individual film stock and developer, how those will behave and react. Like, is it in your zone system? It may not be a true 400 ASA film. It might actually act more like a 200 ASA film. Like, it's Ansel Adams' definition of film speed was exceptionally fluid. And then also going into the darkroom and being insanely meticulous and testing, so that, like, okay, I need to, the dynamic range of what I just shot is this big. It needs to be compressed. The old adage, exposed for the shadows, for the highlights. But how much you're like, for every single sheet of film you do, when you develop, how much you're developing for every single sheet, because they could all be different. It's like meticulous notes.
Are you doing that? Are you doing that, Jarob? Are you doing your own developing and taking your note taking and say, well, this sheet needs like normal development, or I need to give it an extra stop in the developer, or pull it back a bit, or something? Are you doing that, or have you got an army of technicians?
So I used to do it myself when I first got here because I had a dark room, but then we moved buildings from a place that they were leasing, and we moved into the main interior building. When we did that, I didn't get a new dark room. So I now send all the film out for development, but I basically still use the exact same zone system that I established for my films before, because the reason why I do just hold on, time out. Before I get too far ahead of myself, I do take those kinds of notes. I have just journals filled, just stacks of journals with nothing but exposure notes. Exposure and development notes. It's all determined on site. So I basically figure out what the range is of the entire scene, and then I'll be honest, almost 90% of interior shots N-3 every single time. N-3, N-2. Let's get it done. That's how it works, because it's just such an extreme range of luminance that we're dealing with.
Are you working with? Oh God, just got so many questions. Are you working with the same? Presumably, you're working with the same film most of the time, so you've already established what your normal development is, which will give you that range, and so N-3 only really means something once you've established what your normal is, and you don't want to be doing like, folks on the internet. Oh, try shooting this film. Try shooting this film. Try shooting this film. You're presumably using one.
Yeah, I like shooting FP4 and HP5. Those are my favorite because they are awesome in the midtones. Such great film for midtones, not very contrasty, especially if you shoot it really rigidly like I do, metered to a tenth of a stop. Like, that's how I do everything. And so it's all established. And to be perfectly honest, being as particular as you might have had to have been back in the day, like you're talking about, Eric, with Ansel Adams in this, it doesn't really need to be, because we're not doing dark room printing anymore. You have a lot of leeway when you're scanning film.
It's true.
Scanning opens things up a lot,
but you still have to have some level of detail in those highlights. Like, there's something still has to be there, right?
Yeah, but it's kind of crazy because I've talked about this with other people, that what we call the ironclad negative. When you're scanning stuff, it's almost better to be a little bit overexposed.
Okay.
Because some of the scanners, they're D-max in terms of like how much detail they can pull out of those black areas. Some scanners are not good at that. Some scanners they lack there, especially these flatbed scanners. They're, an Epson V850, for example. That's what I use at work, is a V850. That thing is not very good at extracting, details out of the darkest areas of your negative. So you kind of pump the exposure up just a little bit more so that the negative looks a little dense.
Okay.
And you end up getting way more detail out of it, especially if you understand how to go into scanning software and really mess around with the levels in there, setting the black point, setting your white point, messing with the gamma sliders, and then creating your own custom curves.
Something
once you
I've
do that, you can just extract tons of information out of these negatives. It's crazy.
I've actually tried with some little bit of success when I was scanning the 3.25 by 4.25, but the negatives from the X-ray negatives from the Butterfield project. I did that with a DSLR, right? And I was like, I wonder what happens if I auto bracket this with like half stops, third stops, and just like essentially because with digital photography, what a lot of people will do is they'll just shoot these crazy different levels of exposures and mash into Photoshop, an HDR image, right? And I was like, I wonder if I could do that with scans. And it actually, for really difficult negatives, because let's be honest, most of my negatives are really very difficult. Between the handmade camera lens and the fact that it's X-ray film, and that I'm terribly inconsistent in everything I do, a lot of my negatives are super challenging. But that sort of like bracketing of exposure in the scan and then putting them together later worked really well. Like I was shocked.
Of the same negative you were bracketing it? Yeah. Sure thing. I did that in school a lot. When I was in photo school, I would do that. I would scan negatives in at different things and then sandwich them together just to see how it would work. And sure as heck, it works. Yeah, you can do it.
Yeah,
it's a different approach.
Yeah, if you have, basically, for those of you out there, if you have terrible darkroom and shooting discipline like me, you can do that as a way to sort of get more detail out of your negatives. Or if you have really wonderful shooting discipline and a really top-notch developer like Jarob, you don't need to be a hack with your scanning.
I feel like there's something I've got to say it. And this is on behalf of somebody that is not a large format photographer, probably not a film photographer, and somehow they've managed to get this far into the podcast and they're absolutely a digital photographer. And they're thinking, why are you shooting film when,
that was my next question.
when you could go out there with, I don't know, a phase one? Something like that, a really serious top end, not large format sensor, but a large digital sensor. You've got HDR available to you, and clearly there are times when HDR gets a bad reputation from an artistic point of view, quite rightly in many cases, but for what you're doing, it's actually it's a useful technique there, and I just realised I've opened up a whole field of questions here, going back all the way to the point where at your interview they knew about field cameras, they wanted a large format photographer, they wanted it to be on large format, so there's got to be a reason why they wanted you to work so damn hard to get those photographs where they could send somebody out with less experience and get lots of detail, good exposures on digital.
So, just so we're clear, I do go out with a phase one big camera, big sensor too, on a Arca Swiss 6x9 camera. I do that as well. But that's the whole thing. They weren't there yet because we're talking about archivability, right? These photos go to the Library of Congress. They serve as our national record. All public domain. So any photo that I take for the Park Service, you can go ahead and get it right now, and you could print it because the Library of Congress is scanning these things gigantically on the best scanners you could possibly think. I mean, right now they're using a phase one back on a copy stand, scanning these negatives, and they're all available to the public, which is great. But at the time when they were hiring, they didn't have those standards and guidelines for digital in place, or even it wasn't even being thought about at that time. So what they were looking for when they hired someone was a person. someone who understood in depth the analog process so that they could continue the work that was coming in, but also someone who grasps all the concepts surrounding digital photography so that we could develop these guidelines and get them out to the public. We're not there yet. We're still working on those guidelines. We're putting it together. It's been a long process. We have to make sure that when they go out to the public, it's seamless, right? Like, we don't want there to be a big kerfluffle, like people coming back and yelling at us and everything just a total mess. And in terms of, what we're looking for in each file, how that file has to be processed. Because even with doing digital photography, you can't just go out there and do HDR for our process. Those files have to be just one solo file, no HDRing, single capture, no stitching, no anything, because it needs to be a record, right? You want it to be a true rendition of what it is that you're looking at. When you do these HDR processes, you're talking about multiple exposures and things being removed. In some programs that people use, they have like these auto ghosting things that just pull, pixels out. You want everything to be non-destructive and everything. So they were looking for someone that was right in the middle, that could do the old stuff really well, and then move it into the new era of photography.
Jarob, this conservation thing and an archive for the future. A friend of mine dropped some negatives through my door a couple of weeks ago from her late mother of her grandmother. My friend's in her 60s, so we reckon these photographs were 1920, 1930, judging by the dress. Although it's hard to say because they were in Ireland and maybe they were getting married in like her mother's clothes. So, it's hard to date things because they handed wedding dresses down and stuff. But these negatives I had to use, they were big negatives. They were very poorly exposed. But I was able to make some prints for Bridget, my friend. And she was just blessed by it, and I'm thinking, well, if I had some photographs on a 3-inch floppy disk, I couldn't even plug it in anywhere, So what kind of considerations would the archival would surround the your bosses when they're thinking about image preservation in the years? So you're using digital as well, but are they really expecting those digital files to still be retrievable in 100 years' time?
So the Library of Congress does. I mean, that's realistically it, right? Like, the Library of Congress has given us the assurance that can be done, and they are the leaders in that arena. And I've always said to everyone that ever asked me this question about the digital is like, it's not my job to question them. They are the ones that tell us, okay, we're ready to do it, and then it's my job to say, all right, we will conform. We will change our process to match yours, right? So they say it's good to go. I trust them. They're leaders in it. So I start devising the process on our end so that they can accept the files. Because they're looking for specific things in those digital files. Like, you can't really over-process them and all this stuff. Everything has to be you have to be very gentle with the way you're going about doing the contrast and exposure adjustments on those files. Non-destructive editing, they call it. So basically, that's where I stand on it. I don't question them. They say it's good, cool. I can only do so much. Because if we sit here and argue about it, right? If we sit here and argue back and forth on this, nothing's ever going to happen, right? It's just, and I get nervous with large format photography when there's, especially when we're talking about a documentational process here, where sometimes you need to record color. And what's been deemed the most archival color medium is color transparency film.
Yep.
And when you've only got E100G and Fuji Provia and Fuji Velvia 100 as your only options, you need to start coming up with another way to do this documentation, especially for color.
Yeah, it's true.
And so if we sit here and argue about the archivability of this, we might just end up with the ability not to do any documentation at all. We just need to go ahead and start setting these standards and guidelines before it's too late.
Sure. So the job itself is interesting because, we started out like coming in like, oh, you're the large form photographer in the National Park Service. And it sounds as if the gig is, you shoot a lot, but you also, beyond just shooting a lot, sounds like a decent percentage of your time is less about the photography and more about the preservation of the photography itself and the processes around preservation of work, not just producing the work.
Yes, that's true. That is a big part of the job, but I wouldn't say I'm not shooting that much because I work a lot.
I
work a lot. Let's put it that way.
You aren't shooting a lot, but there's like more than people would think. That there's also this other side of it where you're creating processes and guidelines and having a lot of input on like how that stuff is archived and how it's going to be saved forever, basically for as long as possible, as part of the national record itself. And so it's sort of this like interesting administrative back end that you're not just like a part of, but you're guiding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the reason why I think that, when the job was posted, I think a lot of people romanticized it a lot, and they thought about it. But I really think that there are very few people out there that could actually do the position because of everything that comes with it. I love this job, but there are times when it becomes incredibly frustrating, and it's not just because of that. You're working inside of a giant bureaucracy, and there's pluses and minuses with that. It's a great organization to work for. You've got lots of protections. You work with a great group of people, but there's, you got rules you have to follow all the time. So it's not just a matter of like, go do photography. It doesn't work that way. You have to make sure everything checks out, and on everybody, on all sides. When you're going to do a project, all the boxes have to be checked and everything. Safety, the way that you're traveling, you have to follow rules for the way that you travel. There's certain things, there's just all the stuff that surrounds everything with the government job that I just think a lot of people would have trouble with doing that kind of stuff.
Jarob, you often hear it said that if you're in love with photography, this has been my passion for 30, 40 years nearly, to do it as a day job, you can fall out of love with it. Have you fallen out of love with doing it in your spare time, or do you still go and photograph buildings?
So that is funny because I've been having these conversations a lot more since the pandemic, because I kind of was feeling this, that I realized that I had stopped doing photos on my own time. And it's not that I was falling out of love with photography. It's just that my passion for photography was always in historic architecture.
Yeah.
So a lot of my personal needs in photography were being fulfilled by the job, which is crazy because then it kind of opened up a lot of free time for me to do a lot of other things. But in the last year, I've realized that I wasn't producing personal work anymore, and I started changing and addressing that in the last couple months here. I've been going out and shooting a lot more for myself, but I don't do it. I've been exploring other areas of photography that I enjoy. Like, I really like doing environmental portraits. So I picked up my 35 millimeter camera and been doing environmental portraits and mostly that kind of stuff. Maybe going out and photographing, the happenings around DC, whatever they might be. protests or, just life happening there. Kind of getting away from the building stuff on my own time and just trying to make myself a better photographer elsewhere. And I've been dealing with color a lot more too. I've been getting away from black and white. Everybody keeps asking me that. They're like, you don't even shoot black and white film anymore on your own time. And I'm like, I guess I'm kind of tired of it to some extent. And it's not that I don't love it or anything. It's just that I've done so much of it. It's really where I specialized when I was going to school. I just shot so much black and white film. And then when I got here, I just shot so much black and white film. And I kind of been just shooting a lot more color negative film because that's someplace that I've not done a lot.
Are you trying any like the funky off brands? Or are you still sticking to sort of like Portra, like the more traditional color films? Or you're like, I'm bored. Let's try the Lomo Chrome, like purple. Let's just do something goofball.
No, because I am definitely more the traditional type because I am somebody that is a control freak when it comes to my photographs. And I like knowing like that my results are like, they're always going to be like, I know what's going to happen. At least to some extent, I know what's going to happen. And I know the color palette and I know I can kind of visualize it all as it's taking place. It's not that I'm saying that stuff is not relevant or anything like that. I understand. It's just, it doesn't fit my personality.
Right.
So I just stick to the traditional stuff.
I've got to ask this question as well. So top tips then. Simon said architectural photography. Let's go get it really basic. Top tips for architectural photography with a large format camera. And why is using a large format camera so good for architectural photography?
Tips. Well, one, you better be really patient and really like, I'm trying to think of how to say it. You gotta be patient. You need a lot of lights. Make sure you have lots of lights. And understanding how that all works.
But most of us out there who are going to go out, into a city centre and photograph some buildings, if you're allowed to set up a tripod with a large format camera without being trampled on by some Nazis, guarding a building, thinking you're, up to something nefarious. Most of them aren't going to have access to the insides, are they? So so there you are. You've got your view camera. You're set up in a city centre. Give us some top tips for photographing that building that's looming up in front of you.
Always do research. That's the thing I'm always doing. So let's say I'm thinking of a place that I want to shoot. Go out and shoot someplace. I've maybe never been there before, and I'm going there. Google Maps, always on Google Maps constantly. You have to be a lover of maps when you're doing this kind of work, right? Because you want to know what direction something's facing, so you know when the light is on which facade, right? So when you get there, you can get right to business. Always think about how something may look in different types of light, right? Like, well, what might this look like in raw sun? What does this look like how can I envision this looking under a completely overcast day? What kind of shots would I do in a completely overcast day? What kind of shots would I do on raw sun? Usually when it's an overcast day, I like to cut things down and focus on details, right? Because you're getting nice even light and stuff. So you don't really want to take a photo of a building and have just this white washed out sky, right? So, always have a notebook. Always have a pen because you need it. You need to write those notes down. I'm meticulous with it. Every meter reading I take, it goes in a book. Any person I talk to or what a short just detail about every single image I take goes in that book. And I still say that, you need to write out every single stop that you meter. I've been doing this since 2009 only. That's when first time I picked up a camera was in 2009. but I've done it every single day since then. I still need to write everything down in order to organize it in my mind, right? It's just so much info that's coming at you if you're trying to do it to this rigid zone system. It's all coming at you. You need to organize the data, the information. Otherwise, it's going to get all lost and you're not going to get the results you're looking for. It's just that simple.
But are you, I can understand, sorry, Jarob, I understand you applying that degree of rigor for your day job, but when you were doing your project photographing, before you got the job, you were on your own personal projects photographing somewhere. I made a note of it where you were photographing. Were you employing that degree of rigor, or were you just sort of looking at a grey and saying, well, that's roughly mid-tone?
No, I have always been this way. I do not like doing things off the cusp. That's the reason why I like that's the thing. When the large form, it's like I have two personalities, right? Like when I got the large format camera with me, it's very rigid, and I've always been that way. I just can't help it. And that's the reason why I like going to the 35 millimeter camera every now and then, because then I'll literally just take a handheld meter, an incident light meter, and hold it up and be like, what's the sun giving me? Read it. And then I just know based on looking on scenes like, okay, well, if I just do this and then cut the development back, give it this much exposure and pull the development back, great. Whatever happens, happens.
Yeah, you can do that do that with large format as well. You don't need to have palpitations about it, Jarob. Come on, free up the inner anarchist.
Oh, that's a painful thought, Andrew. That is, I cannot.
You can let go. Come on, I'll be your therapist. I'll talk you through it. Let it go.
Oh. I think the reason why is because, I came up learning it in school, right? And when I was in school, it's not like we had to pay for it all, right? So it all became like every single click of the shutter. Instead of hearing the click, I heard more like a cash register just going cha-ching, cha-ching every single time I clicked that shutter. So I think it's just been ingrained in me to be that way. And even my instructors at the school where I learned from at Milwaukee Area Technical College, they pounded that into me because they were about consistency, right? Being a commercial photography, being able to get consistent results, knowing that you're going to be able to do things and promise people things, right? Like you're going to go do a job for somebody, they're paying you money for it. They ask you if you can do something, you tell them you can and know that you can. So they really trained us. I would say it was almost like a boot camp style of photography school where, being super disciplined and always being in that kind of mindset. Very technical.
So you've talked to us a little bit about lighting and, approaching the building and looking at maps and so on and so forth. But what about camera movements? What on personal work or on your day job? What sort of camera movements are you employing and why?
So mostly, for the most part, what we're talking about, is just making sure that both the front and the rear, standards are just parallel, right? Because you're talking about making sure perspective is correct, making sure that the film plane is parallel with the face of the building so that those lines are going straight up and down, right? That's really what and if sometimes you might put a little bit of a forward tilt in just so that you can reduce the f-stop that you're using in certain situations, but that doesn't work all the time and when you're doing interiors. But there are times where I do have to employ crazy swings and tilts and everything. And I'll give one example of this was when I was doing photos at Cape Lookout on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And we were doing the lighthouse there. I had to photograph the door at the top of the lighthouse, an exterior view of it. The wind never stopped blowing less than 30 miles an hour for like 4 days straight. And I'm on top of here with this giant camera and bellows, and it's just vibrating and everything. So all I could think is, I'm never going to be able to take this photo the way that I want to. So how can I do this? How can I get a photo of this door? So what I did was I kind of propped the door at an angle, and then I took the camera and swung it so that the angle matched the door in a certain way, so that we could see these railing details, because there was a path. Think of it like a circle around. There's a path. There's a railing on one side and then a door. So then I lined the door up in a way where it matched this railing detail, and then I took the camera and made a swing so that the angle matched the angle of the door, and then I could shoot it at f8 instead of shooting it at f32 or something like that.
You're manipulating your plane of focus using that S word, aren't you? That we went through a period of asking every guest to explain the Scheimpflug principle, but we won't ask you because clearly you don't use it a lot. When you've got lots of tall things poking up, the Scheimpflug principle is not really much help, is it? You need to keep that traditional depth of field parallel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is part of the Scheimpflug principle.
It is, yeah. That's
parallel. Yeah, it's all part of it. Yeah. It's but just
when people think of it, they think of that manipulating the depth of field. Don't they? We're all waving our hands around on this as though people can see us.
Well, you two are.
I know.
Simon doesn't show his hands because I don't know.
He's got camera there. It doesn't have hands. He has a camera.
Yeah, I was just looking for a beer mat.
Beer mat, yeah.
That's how we explain the Scheimpflug principle. That goes back
it's been a while since Mr. Seinfeld has made an appearance on the show.
Actually, I have a question that stems from a conversation you and I had earlier this week about one of your shots in interior, and it was like an 8-minute exposure because of HP5 reciprocity, and a million strobe shots in order to get that balance in and out, which is why I started to think of how you managed to balance your interior and exterior, and in terms of the lighting and the zones, and how much you pull or push for development in order to deal with that. But you were talking about going to these really remote places by yourself. But how do you transport? Like, how many light heads and do you end up having to pull up into those places when it's you an 8x10, God knows how many film holders, and then a massive number of heads? Right, and then like your gear is crazy.
Yeah, it's usually about I think I'm trying to remember. I think it was about 500 pounds of gear that I take when I do this. When I do film, it's a lot less when I do digital, but when I do film, it's about 5. Especially in a really big shoot like you're talking about. That was at Oregon Caves. That photograph. Yeah, that's about 500 pounds of gear that I take on those particular shoots. Let me think. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'd say anywhere from 4 to 8 strobe heads, all different, power outputs on those strobe heads. I also bring a small strobe pack that I can use handheld. Because basically, you want to set up lights and get a good base, where you want lights to be coming from and source, but then use that small one to kind of paint the space in between.
But how do you? I forgot. I mean, the interesting thing then is you've got 4 to 6 to 8 heads, and then you've got a smaller unit that you sort of fill in the gaps or based on your experience, paint in on your intuition. But this is an 8x10. Do you end up setting up a digital and testing a few times to make sure, okay, this is what this is? You're just no, I have this. I'm going to expose 2 sheets of 8x10 with this, and I'm good. How does that actually work out? Because flash is something that you can't, you can't just sort of make it up. You have to meter to to an insane degree, right? And
it's kind of crazy because even folks that I work with, they think it's crazy because I always say that it's a translation of numbers.
Right.
All those flashes are written down. I do not do what people call a digital Polaroid.
Right.
I can't work like that. It's too much of a process. It slows me down way too much. I can do it much quicker by just meticulously writing down the readings on my meter in a book and doing all these calculations and just knowing. Like, I just know exactly what it's going to look like because I can picture it in my head. Like, I can just, it's so weird. It's hard for me to even explain. Based on the numbers that I've written down and the light modifiers that I'm using, because I know what kind of light type I want to use for particular areas, whether it's an umbrella, a softbox, or just a raw strobe head, or maybe a bounce off of a wall or something. I just know what that kind of light is going to do. And then it's just a matter of those numbers that I have written down translating to a visual. So it's like I set up all these lighting ratios, and it's just really crazy. It's hard to explain and put into words because a lot of people, it's so visual for everyone else, right? Like even back in the day, a lot of people were shooting Polaroids first, right? They were shooting Polaroids, and I don't do that. It's just all in a book, and it just all translates right to the negative. And I for flash photography, I expose 4 sheets of film. And the way that I do it is I figure out what the ambient light situation is, because I want the photo to look natural. I don't want it to look flashed. I don't want it to look like just outrageously somebody just took lights and just indiscriminately threw light into an area just for the sake of getting detail out, right? I want it to look something like you would experience if you were to walk into a place. First, go through and meter the ambient light. And usually I always check the highlight first. What's that at? And then I go and find the darkest spot. And if that dark spot is outside of the realm of the dynamic range, which, is, visually it's 5 stops, but in the sense of film, it's 8 stops because you can pull 3 stops off the top and get it into that 5-stop range. If it's outside of that 8-stop range, I just set it all the way down, and then I base everything off of that. Keep that exactly the same. That base exposure for the ambient light is always the same, and then I just bracket my flashes. So I do 1 shot. The first sheet of film is always, okay, this is the way that I've metered it. This is the way that I think it's going to work based off of those meter readings. Great. Then I do another exposure, same ambient same ambient calculation, but then I just do the flashes 1 stop up.
Okay.
Third shot, flashes are 2 stops up from that first exposure. And then the 4th frame, which I rarely ever use. In fact, I don't even know why I do it anymore. I think it's just because the film holder has 2 sides on it. There's 4 sheets of film, and I don't want to get all confused. I always do one with the flashes 1 stop down. And I never use that one because I'm usually pulling 3 stops off. And that's something that people don't think of when you're using flash in these situations. Now, so because you're pulling 3 stops off. So when you're pulling 3 stops down, you can flash the crap out of something, pull 3 stops out, and you're pulling all that detail out of where you just flashed. The only thing you have to worry about is where the shadows are going. You don't want shadows going in every which direction. So you can throw a flash across a room all over the place, pull it back 3 stops, and it looks like perfectly exposed because nothing's blown out or anything. As long as your initial meter reading is good, you can throw flash like crazy and just extract detail through the manipulation of development.
Do you do a single pop, or are there times when you do multiple pops with the strobe head?
Oh, geez. Man, at Ellis Island, let me tell you about this one. Ellis Island was crazy. Ellis Island was insane. So seriously, they sent me, this is my first assignment, one of my first assignments with
Of course it's your first one, right? Yeah.
Yeah, this is crazy. I was so nervous because they had news there watching me and everything. And I'm like, I've never done anything like this in my life. This is crazy. It was just this huge space. It was completely dark. And the park was like, we want this room photographed. And I kind of looked at him like, are you kidding me? This place is huge and it's all dark with windows and light. Like, how am I going to do a photo here and keep all this information in check? So I purposely left it all the way till the last day because I was so nervous about this one shot. And I was just trying to figure out, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And finally, I just had to calm down. I was like, look, dude, like having a conversation with myself in my hotel room one night. I'm like, you know how to do this. It's all photographic theory, right? Like you take a meter reading, a flash, it comes in, let's say, you got that and it's at F16, but you need to get to F32, two pops equals the next one, 4 pops equals the next stop, on and on, right? It just goes up, and then figuring out, inverse square laws. Like, so, okay, if the flash is at this distance, is the flash at this distance reads at this one, you double the distance, then you're talking about you've lost this number of stops, and then doing it all based off of that. And I had to do this across this giant space in multiple rooms in all these different locations. So I ended up doing a 15-minute exposure. I did this only on this one I only did 2 sheets of film because it was so long. 15-minute exposure. And then I had a flash, 2 flashes raw on either side of the camera that I was just chucking light down this corridor as far as I could. Just chucking it. I can't remember how many flashes were on those. I had no clue. I'd have to go look at my notes. But then I had flash heads with individual battery packs located in certain places along the way where I'd walk through the scene and get to it. And then we're talking like back wall, like 32 flashes. Then I'd like put that flash down. Then I go to another, like this back room. And there was a flash there that I had to pick up with its battery pack. And I had to flash this space 60 times. Then I had to like go to another room with the same, to another flash. Or no, I used the same flash because I needed the 1000 watt second head. So I carry this thing and I had battery packs set up in strategic locations along the way because I was using the full amount of the battery in one area. So it was like 60 flashes here, 60 flashes there, 60 flashes in this other location, and it was just nonstop, like all the way around. It was crazy.
So it was like crazy choreography. Like you had a 15-minute shot, and in that 15-minute shot, you had a script where you started at A, you did this, you went to B, you did this, you went C, you did this, all the way through for 15 minutes until you ended back at the camera, and you went click, and you closed the shutter.
Yeah.
Well, all I can say is I'm glad I turned the job down because you're clearly the better man for the job. I'd have quit on day one.
Well, it's great when you start throwing like the yellow filters in and like all these different color filters, because then all those meter readings you take, you have to go in your notebook and then like, oh yeah, so that flash isn't actually reading it. That I need to take a stop and a half off, and then like put all these other little like variables in there, and it becomes very tedious but fun. I like solving these puzzles.
So you like math is what I'm.
I used to not. It's funny, up until I did photography, I used to think I was terrible at math and I thought I could never do it. But then I found this thing where you are dealing with these equations and stuff, and it's applicable. And after I started doing photography, all of a sudden I'm like going to school to do like astronomy classes and like doing these calculations, like figuring out like wavelengths to stars and stuff, and like math equations that are like 4 pages long, and just loving every second of it. It's funny what photography's done in terms of changing the perception of myself even and what I'm capable of.
Where did the love of photography and photographing old buildings stem from?
They're kind of 2 separate things. The love of photography came from, it's two things happen at the same time. Like my stepfather, he loves photography. loves it. And he always wanted to go to school for it, but he said that he just never had the money growing up to do photography because photography is an expensive thing. So around 2008 or so, he started showing my brother this old Canon AE1 camera and like going out and shooting it and showing us how these things work in the process of photography at a very basic level, right? A very basic level. And at that same time, a friend of mine took a beginner's class, like the photography 101 at the school that I ended up going to. And he comes home one day and he's like, he just throws a slide at me. And he's like, take a look at this. What the heck is this thing? I don't know what to do with this thing. What are you talking about? I don't even know what this is. It's film, man. Just take a look at this. I think you'll really enjoy this. And I look at it, but I don't know what a chrome is at this time. I have no clue. So I'm like, I don't know. What am I? Hold it up to the light. Hold it up to the light. And I hold this 35 millimeter like little frame up to the light. And it was instant. I was like, oh, what is this magic? What are you? This looks awesome. Wait. What are you talking about? What, you made this with a camera? How does this whole process work? And it was almost instantly, these two things came together. My stepfather like encouraging me to look into this, and then my friend showing me a chrome, and just instantly I went out and bought a camera. It was just that fast, and it just overtook me. I just cut off everyone. I got rid of my phone. I stopped like just taking any kind of communication from anyone. And all I did was just start hitting books and just learning and shooting all the time. And it was like shooting, getting film, looking at it, being super critical of myself, right? Like, God, I suck. I'm terrible. I don't want to be terrible. I want to be good at this. Everything was just, I want to be good at this. I want to know how to be better at this. I'd see photos like all over the place. I'm like, I want to take photos like that. At that time, it was Flickr, right? Flickr was the big photo sharing thing.
Yeah.
I would be on there night and day just looking at photos constantly. Like, I want to know how to do that. I want to know how to do that. I think that person's photo is amazing. So it wasn't like so much looking at the masters of photography. I was really gaining inspiration from just everyday people that were posting photos and seeing what they were doing and thinking, wow, this is like, there's so many people that are doing great things out there. I want to incorporate all these small little tidbits of what they're doing in my photographs and just getting better at it. And then it wasn't even that much longer after that. My brother shows me this photo, the Ansel Adams, Snake River and the Tetons, and I remember seeing that photo and going, what the heck is this?
Right.
And I was like, what camera did he take this with? Like, what was this, a Canon? A 5D Mark II or something? And he's like, no, this is a view camera. And I'm like, whoa, a view camera? Well, what's this?
Like, what the hell?
And he tells me it's a film camera. And I could not believe, I had no idea what large format film was at that time. And I could not believe that this photograph was made with film, because I was so used to those little like Kodak flat cameras with I can't remember the name of the format. What is it? The crap little negatives that are like this big. They're like those little tiny negatives, and 35 millimeter.
You can have fun with the 110. Don't knock it.
Yeah, 110. That's it. 110 film. Yeah. So when I saw that photo, I started looking into view camera more. And at that same time, I was kind of photographing buildings with my 35 millimeter camera. But, the buildings are all falling in every direction. I didn't understand what was going on. And it was just pissing me off. Like, why is it that I see all these people with these beautiful photos of buildings? Like, they just look so perfect. How are they getting these perfect photos of buildings? What's the madness behind this? How do you do it? And then I look at get introduced to this view camera by way of Ansel Adams, and then I start doing research on the view camera and find out, oh, well, this camera was made for shooting architecture because of the movements it allows you, like these movements of this camera. Well, I got to know more about this. And then that's what eventually ended up pushing me into going to college, because I wanted to learn the zone system that Ansel Adams, I wanted to learn how to do it, and I wanted to learn how to use that camera. And I knew that I could do the research and possibly learn it myself, but I would never be confident if I did the research myself. I needed to go to a formal education so that I would feel confident in what I was doing. I know that other people can be self-taught. I just couldn't do that and feel confident going forward.
So rolling back to the start of that, I think I'm super curious. One of the things I've noticed, and maybe Andrew and Simon have as well, is there's a whole generation. I'm obviously a bit older than you. There's a whole generation of kids to young adults who never really produced anything that's physical. Like they've lived a digital life. So when they see you shooting film, and they're just like, whoa, let alone like something like an instant camera, it's just like a light, like, holy cow, you're going to produce something that you can hold in your hand, which is just because they've done nothing but digital, is just a mind-blowing moment. So when your buddy handed you a Chrome, was that the switch where you're like, holy shit, what is this? Was it that physicality of the medium? Like, what was it about that really hit you between the eyes?
The thing that got me was this idea that, like, light passing through this lens and interacting with the substrate and recording that exact moment onto this physical thing. So it's all these things that are interacting with one another physically, right? Like in real time, and then producing something that you can always go back and revisit
right
at any time you want. And it was that whole process that really kind of hooked me in. And I think also too, is just like the whole idea of you got this tool that you sit there and tinker with, right? Like, you got this lens you're focusing and all these things. And, but yeah, I think with that film, it was just really this idea that it's this, like, the idea of light passing through glass and touching it and then recording something in front of you and it becoming physical. That really just blew my mind.
Like magic.
Yeah. Yes, very much so.
So, Jarob, when this job was advertised, or maybe shortly afterwards when it was hitting the press, it was described as the next Ansel Adams. Well, all I've heard you talk about so far is photographing old buildings. So what about Yosemite and, Bridewell Falls and all that nonsense?
Well, if they want me to go and photograph the lodge at Yosemite, I'll be there first thing. But yeah, that's not really a part of the job description. We don't really do the traditional landscape. Actually, don't at all. Don't do any of the traditional landscapes. I don't really know how the whole Ansel Adams thing came to be. He never did this job. Ever. He was a contract photographer for Department of Interior, which is where you see a lot of his really well-known photographs came from, is that he was commissioned by DOI to go out and do photographs of the landscapes. But that is about as much as he's ever done for us. And even then, I mean, we're talking about for Department of Interior. He didn't even work for National Park Service ever. So I think the real connection with Ansel Adams in this particular position is just a pretty
tenuous one.
In-depth knowledge of the zone system and the view camera. Really, that's it. Other than that, there's no connection at all.
So ultimately, it was just a marketing piece to how can we get as many people, quality people, to come and apply for this job as possible. I know, let's talk about Ansel Adams, and it'll be on television, and the world will see it, and we'll get some publicity as well.
So it's crazy because I've asked that question about that, and it wasn't made up internally. They say that, like, everyone I talked to at the Park Service said that basically the media found this job posting about this view camera position, and they labeled it as, I don't know, man, people pointing fingers at one another. That's what I was told by everyone inside the Park Service, was the media saw the job posting and then they picked it up and ran with it. They never expected. What's that?
Fake news.
Yeah. In this instance, yeah.
Well, I think
very much.
It speaks to how strongly Ansel Adams' work identified with very specific national parks. Like, you think of Ansel Adams and you think Yosemite, you think these monumental national parks, right? And so if the National Park Service is looking for a view photographer, right, like, you immediately think, who do you think of? Ansel Adams. You think of the national parks, you think of Ansel Adams. You don't think of that the National Park Service runs the monuments. Like, that includes the Lincoln Memorial. It includes Washington. It includes these big iconic buildings. People don't actually make the connection that, like, the guy patrolling that is a Park Service ranger.
Yeah.
Right? And that's part of the national park infrastructure. They think these giant national parks that were established by Roosevelt and the others. And the most iconic American photographer who ever did anything with that, made a huge impression on America, was Ansel Adams.
Yeah. Well, and he did. I mean, he lived in Yosemite. I mean, he lived there, and he definitely was connected. It's he played a part in the Park Service. I'm not saying he didn't play a part there. It's just, as a matter of being employed by the Park Service, that was never a thing. And yeah, people don't really ever think about, like, Ellis Island. Ellis Island is National Park Service. People don't think about that, and that's an immigration station. It's just a hospital and, like, all these other buildings that helped that hospital run. It's not what you normally think about when you think of the Park Service. And the National Park Service also administers the National Historic Landmarks Program. We also administer the National Registry of Historic Places. We're in charge of all of that stuff. So it's the Park Service is a lot bigger than what people think.
I read somewhere that you use a 5x7 camera, not 8x10. So that's why.
No. It's got to be.
Why is it?
It's definitely 8x10 because that's what Eric said.
Oh, yeah. Eric said that, did he? Oh.
Eric got that. Eric definitely got that wrong. I shoot the quirky format of 5x7.
Okay, there we go.
But when I first got here, I definitely shot 4x5 more because I was used to it. But then, as I was shooting more and looking at photographers before, so Jack Bauscher, he had this job. He was in a position here doing this job for 50 years. He was in this position for 50 years.
Jeez. And
he shot strictly 5x7. And I started reading some of the books that he had and was looking at his images on, the Library of Congress. And I started realizing that 5x7 works so much better for architecture than the boxier format of 4x5 or 8x10. And it's, you think about it, it's because, you're looking up at buildings. You want to get vertical. It's a little bit more stretch. You can fit more of that information in. Or if you're doing, you're looking down the facade of a building, that elongated frame just reads better with architecture. So I actually prefer it, and it's a happy medium too. You get more resolution, just squeak out a little bit more resolution than 4x5, and it's not a hulking behemoth like the 8x10. I'm sorry, I do not want to be hauling an 8x10 around. Everybody that shoots 8x10 right now, I bow to you. You are amazing, because I cannot believe you haul that giant monster around.
But
film's
5x7 films can be hard to find.
Yeah, I was going to say that film's availability is the issue, isn't it? Surely.
It is. That really is a problem. There's no color transparency in 5x7 film anymore, and they don't sell. They only sell it in packs of 25. So, like in 4x5, you can get 100 sheets in one box, and the price is a little bit better because of it. You can't do that with 5x7. It's worrisome to me because I think that any day they could just be like, that's gone, and just rip my heart out.
Oh, well, just go digital. You'll be fine.
Just go digital.
Stop it. Shush you.
Right. Well, Jarob, I think this is probably the time where we need to start to wind things down, largely for Andrew's benefit, because he was standing up earlier on, and all we could see was his waist.
Deep vein thrombosis. I was getting deep vein thrombosis. I'm going to keep these podcasts get any longer. I'm going to be collapsing through the blood clots.
I was going to say the actual recorded show is going to be considerably shorter than the amount of time we've actually been talking.
That's it. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. Well, I finish this. I go through to the other room, and Julie will say, "How can you be talking for over 3 hours? What can you find to talk about? You don't talk to me for 3 hours at a stretch. What can you talk about with these guys?"
I get that too. Yeah. I absolutely 100%.
Yeah. Yep. 46 episodes in, and we're still going. Yeah. Right. Now let's properly start to wind things down. First thing I want to do is just say thank you to those people that have donated to us since last time via finding our coffee page. That's ko-fi.com, and somewhere on there, large format photography podcast, you can find us. In fact, actually, if you just after ko-fi.com, if you just put / large format photography podcast, you will actually find our page. But we've had 2 donations since last time, and they are from Buzz, and he says, great shows recently. I always think that means that the ones before haven't been quite so good. So great shows recently, going from strength to strength. Always looking forward to new episodes. Have a coffee on me, Eric too. Thank you very, very much, boys. And Nick Smith says, really enjoying the podcast with your eclectic and fascinating range of guests. You keep taking me down new large format rabbit holes with each show. Well, I think there's quite a few this week as well, so sorry about that, Nick.
Not sorry.
Yep. Sorry, not sorry. We're not going to do any emails this week. We're going to bunch those together, like we did with Matt. So when we have enough emails, we'll do a bit of a catch-up show and an email show. So that is those. Now then, back to you, Jarob. If you have the best place to see your images is probably on Instagram, which is actually we were chatting earlier. It's a very, very limited range of photographs because there's lots of archive work going on in the background, and so the majority of your images aren't yet available, and that's something that's been worked on. So best places to see what people can see of your work. What's that going to be? Is that going to be Instagram?
Instagram would be the best place to see them, but it's not going to be all of them. To see the collection at large, to see what other photographers have produced for our collection, you could see that at www.nps.gov/HDP. And then you would go to the collections tab on the left-hand side, and it'll take you to Library of Congress website where all of the photos are, and the architectural drawings as well, and the histories for each.
Sounds about as easy to get to as our coffee page. So all the W's at .mps.gov/HDP, did you say?
Oh,
Yeah,
I
HTTP.
think we've just lost Jarob.
He did say /HTTP, and then the collections,
and then go to collections.
Yeah.
Yep.
His picture is paused in a
He's frozen.
most unflattering manner.
Well, hopefully he might come back. So I think in the meantime, while he's trying to knock on the door to get back in, hopefully, let's do our contact details. And let's go to... They never know which one I'm going to go to first. And I'm going to say, Andrew, have you got a shout-out this week?
No.
Okay. And how can people keep up with the things that you get up to?
Oh, I'm moaning on Twitter quite a lot. War Boys.
There?
Hello, Jarob.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, we were filling for you there.
Yeah.
Nobody knew. Nobody could tell. We're just doing like shout-outs and contact details. So we'll let Andrew finish off with this bit, and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram as Warboys Snapper, and I have a separate pinhole feed, Warboys Snapper _pinholes, funnily enough. Or you can find me hanging around 2 Facebook groups. That's our Large Format Photography Podcast Facebook group and the Lensless Podcast Facebook group.
Yeah. And if somebody wants to get in touch with us and maybe have a question for us or something like that, what's the best way of doing that?
Large Format Photography Podcast at Yahoo, is it?
No.
I've forgotten.
Sir.
I don't know. What is it? Eric, what's the email address?
I believe it's what you started with.
Large Format Photography Podcast at gmail.com.
Yeah, there you go. Well done. Done.
Where did I get Yahoo from? No one has Yahoo email addresses today.
GeoCities or whatever it is.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
Yes.
Just dated all of us except for Jarob, who's like, GeoCities, the hell's that?
Yeah. So Jarob, we sort of got your how to get to your photographs, and decided that was really hard.
Yeah. So my Instagram handle is just at Jarob Ortiz. And if you want on Facebook, there's also, you can look up heritage documentation programs, and my photos will scoot across those pages too.
Yeah. But it is worth noting that it's not, there's a huge volume of photographs that are currently being digitized, and there's a backlog, so therefore we're not going to see too many of your things on there at this moment. So but that's going to change at some point.
You might even be deceased by the time the first one comes up.
Don't say that. They joke about that all the time in the office.
but we do have something of an exclusive, well, an almost exclusive. We were chatting offline earlier. We had a little break in the recording, and the artwork we're going to be using for today's podcast is going to be that epic photograph, or a square version of, is perhaps the best way to put it, a square version of the Ellis Island photograph that took 15 minutes and saw Jarob running around with flashes and running out of batteries and generally panicking. You can see that photograph, and it'll have LFPP written down the side of it, so that will be able to view.
You're going to see a beautiful photograph we're going to crop square and ruin with our initials. But just imagine in its full glory without our
5x7 to Hasselblad. All right, cool. Let's do it.
Exactly.
Let's do it.
Yeah, you can look at it, and it'll be in low res. So even better.
This guy's the new Ansel Adams. Really?
That's the funniest thing, is that at work I have a book sitting right next to my computer that's like, it's seriously just a tiny little book, and it's all of Ansel Adams photographs, and people just laugh whenever they come in there because it's the smallest, like it fits in the palm of your hand, of all these large format photographs. And I'm like, what is the point of this book? I'm like, no, that is the point. It's tiny photographs of big photographs. It's great.
Let's head over to California and Eric. How can people keep up with the kind of things that you're up to when you're not doing this podcast or looking after bunnies?
Well, Instagram, Eric Matthew. Same as always. Actually, say Eric. Eric H. Mathy, ERIKHMATHY, and there will be bunnies on that, of course, and lenses and under construction, and the occasional odd photograph that I take when I manage to take photographs.
Excellent. And for myself, I'm on Twitter as Simon4. I'm on Instagram as Simon Forster Photographic, which is also the name of my website if you stick co.uk after that, and that's where you can buy lots of lens caps, as many lens caps as you want. So
very nice lens caps as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's a point. I dropped you those lens caps, the custom made lens caps for your Leica lens or
my projector lens.
Yes. Yeah. Your 200mm Elmar, because I've got exactly the same lens. I thought to myself, I can just measure mine and just send these across.
It's very nice of you. And I gave you quite a lot of marketing. I shared it widely and told people where they could go to get their bright red lens caps from.
I was going to send you orange ones, but I thought better of it because you'd be moaning about anything that I do in orange. So I thought, no, that's pushing things too far.
The running joke, Jarob, is Simon has the most obnoxious orange chroma view camera that man or God has ever seen. Like, basically, you could take his camera hunting in Wisconsin and be.
I was going to say Hunter Orange.
Totally, yes. It's obnoxious.
Or KTM cycles. Oh, there you go. Andrew's
demonstrating. I like that. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. I like that.
That was my lens cap being demonstrated there, by the way, for listeners on the radio. Anyway, yes, it looks very nice, Andrew. And I can also be heard. We've been a bit tardy on doing shows for the Classic Lenses podcast, but hopefully we're going to be doing something pretty soon. And I think that's just about it. Our music is by Kevin MacLeod, and it's called Two Finger Johnny, and everybody loves it without exception. And that's it. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's show, and it'd be great if you can come back another time. So goodbye.
Yeah.
Bye.
See ya.
Thanks.
Say goodbye.
Yeah.
Goodbye.